Welcome to part 2 of What Can You Do with a Crayon? And we're going to pick up right where we left off in part 1, and that is how to take the different crayon techniques and use them in a larger picture. So I'm going to draw something that's more recognizable. I'm going to make a tree, and then I'm going to make a little bit of a background just to show you how some of the things we just explored can be used if you're drawing more of a realistic or representational picture. Of course, if you want to start with a pencil, you can. You could even start with pencil, outline it with marker, and then color it in with crayon. This video only is going to focus on crayon, so I'm going to stick to crayon. And maybe I'll draw some type of oak tree. And I'm just imagining the tree. But of course, if you're drawing something and you need help figuring out what it looks like, find a picture. And I'm making this tree up. And I'm thinking, I always tell people when you draw trees, if you're drawing from your imagination, or even if you're going to observe them, you're going to notice that as they branch out, they get thinner as they go up, and there's lots of V and Y shapes that are formed. So you could kind of use that in your head as you're drawing. It does help to observe a tree or a picture of a tree. And if you don't know what to draw something you know about or that you like. I always tell people, stick to something that you're passionate about. Maybe you really like cats. If you have a cat, you could look at your cat and try to draw it, or look at a photo of it, or maybe look at cartoon images of it to start with. So I have the basic shape of my tree, and I'm going to find some green here, thinking of spring and summer. And I'm just drawing in the basic shape. I'm using lots of those curvy lines. Kind of looks like a big piece of broccoli right now. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use lots of little marks to show the texture of the tree. I'm pressing down kind of hard with the brown, but I'm going to add some other colors in there too. I could use the side of the crayon to give me some really little marks. And we're not going to see all the branches. Well, that's the nice thing about art. You can just give an impression of something without having to draw every little detail. Of course, there are artists out there who are great at including every detail, and you look at their work and it almost looks like a photograph. That's called photorealistic. Alrighty, looking for a darker color here to add to that. You can probably hear me rummaging around. I start off organized and then I get kind of messy as I go. Here we go. Can't find my black crayon, so I'm going to use this block crayon just to get some darker marks in there. Oh, you know what? I could have even actually rubbed a real tree to make the texture of the tree. That would have been cool. All right, so now I'm going to color a little bit. I'm going to speed it up, and then I'll come back and show you some more ideas that go with it. All right, so you saw me go ahead and color in the tree. I used lots of scribbly marks, and I made sure to use different shades of green to help show that there was some type of form to the tree. Same with the brown. Also, scribbling is art. Sometimes you have to use scribbly marks to make the texture of something. And even just sitting down and scribbling on a piece of paper, that's how we all start. I mentioned it in one of my other videos, but you can make shading using scribbling. Scribbling really close together is going to give you a darker shade, where scribbling farther apart, looser scribbles, is going to give you a lighter shade. So if somebody tells you that scribbling is an art, you can tell them, no, I can create shade and form using scribbles. All right, so I'm going to work on the rest of the picture really quick. I think I'm going to use the tracing technique, and I thought maybe this is going to be an interesting like nighttime scene. Maybe I will make a moon kind of glowing in the distance. And I'm just going to use this color, this bluish color to start with. And I'm just going to trace half of that circle. Well, part of it, I guess. I wanted to make a crescent moon. It's a big moon, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be real. I'm not going to worry about that other little overhanging piece. Maybe I'm going to start by pressing down really hard. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to press down hard and get lighter. I'm using the side of the crayon to get a gradual shading. And I'm going to add this red violet, which I'm really liking this color because it's so soft. I might use some for the night sky because I'm imagining it's like dusk or twilight, where the sun's gone beneath the horizon. The moon can be seen, but there's still a little bit of light. And I guess the tree would be a silhouette if that was the case. So, I don't know. This is just going to be maybe a made-up picture then. That's okay. This is from my imagination. I'm adding a little black to make that darker. Let's see what happens. I'll add this peach color. And I'm curious, I don't know if there's enough crayon on there, but I want to try the penny technique. It does a little bit. It's kind of rubbing and putting all the colors together. I'd say if you're interested in the penny technique, definitely try it out as a practice on a piece of scrap paper and see if it's something that you could use in your art. Okay, maybe for the background, just for fun, I'm going to try the cardboard rubbing. And I'm going to use this color because I like it so much. I'm just curious to see how it looks. I know it doesn't look necessarily realistic anymore, but I don't care. I think it's kind of interesting. It gives it an interesting texture and feeling and mood. This is reminding me of like a summer evening where you stay up really late and then just enjoy being outside in nature. Whether it's your backyard or a park or camping or in the wild. Now I'll go ahead and overlap that with another color. And then I want to add some more lines down here to create some grass. Maybe this is a tree where people like to go to sit and then stargaze at night. That green is not showing up as quite as I want. So this is more of a sunset scene, not twilight or dusk. Maybe there's some little flowers growing here. So I'm just going to make some squiggly marks. Some little circles, clusters of plants. Again, I'm just suggesting something there by the marks I'm making. It's almost done, I think. Maybe we need a little path. So again, I'm using the side of my crayon here. And, oh, now I have another idea. Maybe I could do one more rubbing I put this fabric underneath here. Maybe there's a blanket or somebody's laying. And I'll kind of draw out the shape first so I know where to put it, and then I'll do some rubbing. Kind of is working. Let's try this little piece of crayon. Oh, yep, now it's working. So if you want to control the rubbing, I definitely recommend breaking up little pieces of crayon. See the texture that was picked up from this burlap? I think I'm about done. I know I already said that, but the thing that's fun about art is sometimes you get going and you don't want to stop. And sometimes I think I'm done and then I walk away from it and come back a little bit later and I have a whole nother idea. I mean, maybe I would make a person or a picnic basket. We just put one more little bunch of like plants in here. And I think I'm going to stop. Hopefully this gives you some interesting ideas on how to use crayons. So here's how the finished piece turned out. I may do more to it later, or maybe it's just going to give me ideas for the next piece I make. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about how to use crayons and have fun creating. And remember, even though crayons are a simple material, they can do awesome things. Thanks for watching. See you next time. And of course, one thing that's fun to do with crayons is just to simply doodle with a crayon and see what happens. Whether you're just going to start with a shape and transform it, or maybe you have an idea in your head. I'm thinking of an animal. So I've drawn like a circle and an oval shape, and notice that I'm drawing right over the marks that I just made. I'm not worrying about it being perfect because this is just a rough sketch and it's fun because crayons are really easy to draw with. I can color over areas if I don't like them. I'm just going to see what comes out of my head. Looks like it's a cat. So maybe if you're used to drawing with a pencil first, see what happens if you just start with a crayon. You might surprise yourself. One thing it allows you to do is loosen up a little bit, so you're not so worried about making everything just right. And I certainly know what that feels like. It took me a lot of practice to kind of train myself to be okay with not being perfect or making mistakes. And then I realized once I let myself be a little looser or more free with my art, that's where really interesting and fun stuff started happening. And I found that I actually can draw in a way that fits my personality even better when I loosen up a little bit. Everybody makes art in a different way. And it might take some time of finding the right material that fits you. So don't be afraid to keep experimenting and trying new things. So here's my cat. So here's my finished doodle drawing. I started with the cat, and then I thought it needed like a fish surfboard, so I added a fish and some water. And you saw me use the block crayon when I did part of the water. You might have also noticed that sometimes I use the side of the crayon to color with rather than like this. It allows me to go faster. And then if you really like your work, I would say make sure you save it, hang it up, get a frame for it. You might come back to it later when you're doing a different type of art and use it as a starting point or inspiration. I like this picture. I think I'll sign it. Allie LaRock, 2020. And you might decide to sign your work on the front of your drawing or painting or whatever it is you're making, but it's also okay to put it on the back. I'd recommend at least putting it on the back, putting a date on it or any additional thoughts or a title. Not all artwork is signed and not all artwork is titled. I hear a lot of people say all good art is signed. All good art has a title. That's not always true. Sometimes an artist doesn't want to title their work. They just leave it untitled. They might feel that their artwork has enough to say just as it is. And sometimes this signature might not work on the front of a picture. I often put my signature on the back of my paintings because I feel like sometimes it's actually going to distract from what I've made. So everybody does it different. And I really want to stress, you should always work in the way that fits you the best. Next, I want to show how you could do a watercolor resist, which means to paint over your crayon drawing. Because crayons are waxy, the watercolor will not ruin the crayon. Instead, the crayon will resist the paint and the paint will fill in all the empty spaces. And I will show you. Now, if you actually have watercolor paints at home, you can sure use those. I will demonstrate with these as well. But first I want to show, if you don't have watercolor or if you want to try something new, you could always use food coloring. So I have 3 dishes. I'm just going to put a little water in each one. I don't need a lot of water. And I'm going to put a couple drops of blue in here. 1, 2. And I'm going to stir it up. And then I'm going to, I could do red. The primary colors, right? We talked about that in part 1. And a couple drops of yellow. Well, that turned out to be like 3 or 4 drops. It came out really fast. Now let's talk about color mixing again. I'm not going to mix all of these, but what happens if I put some yellow in with the red? It should turn orange, and we'll see it on the paper. I don't know if I mentioned this in part 1, but when we mix the primary colors together to create a new color, that color is called, who knows, secondary color. So I'm going to mix some blue and yellow. I'll just try 1 drop of blue because the blue is very strong. Oh, that made green. I don't need purple, so I'm not going to mix red in with the blue right now. Now, I'm going to paint with these in a second. If you're going to be painting with regular watercolor paints, one thing that you can do, and this water's a little colored, but that's okay, is just put some plain water in each one of these, like a drop of water. Your brush doesn't even have to touch it. You could just drop the water in. And that is going to help loosen up those watercolors. Because if you've ever tried to paint and it's getting frustrated, you're getting frustrated because the paint's not coming out, you really probably need to get the paint wet and have it loosened up a little bit before you start painting with it. So you can even put the drops of water in and let that sit while you're getting something else ready. All right, I think I'm going to use this image that I made to try out the watercolor resist. So, oh, I see I need more blue food coloring. That's fine if you want a light blue, but I wanted it to be a little darker. So I'm going to add 2 more good drops in there. And the reason I didn't put a lot of water in is because if you have a lot of water, then you're going to have to use even more food coloring. You don't want to use up the whole bottle. And I could probably even make it darker. So I probably shouldn't have put so much water in. Just a teeny bit of water. Well, now you'll know, and you can always do some experimenting, right? So do you see how it's not going to ruin the drawing? It just fills in all the spaces that are white. And I'm using a flat brush. It works well to brush back and forth. But let's say you don't have any paints, you have food coloring, and you don't have any brushes. You could dip a paper towel or a rag or something into the paint and smear it on too. You can be creative to find supplies to create with. You could even invent your own brushes. All right, so there's some more of the water. I'm going to rinse this brush off just in some plain water, and I'm going to dip it in this orange color, which is also really, really light. That's okay. Let's just see what it looks like. I like it. It's a very mild color, but I think it's fun. So again, I can paint right over my cat. It is not going to ruin anything. It'll just fill in any spots that were white. Let's say I want to do some other things. Maybe I'm going to add a little bit of this purplish pink color. So you can see the watercolor tray is a little bit more vibrant, but you can also get vibrant colors with food coloring. You could get lots of little containers or jars and really see how many different colors you can mix up. And I see I'm painting on regular drawing paper, so my paper is getting really wavy. If you happen to have watercolor paper, or which is a paper that's made especially for paint, or a canvas, you sure could use that. I just know that I can't keep brushing over it because it's going to rip. I'd have to wait till it's dry to add more layers. But I can do one other technique using the old toothbrush. And the food coloring will work, but I'm just going to use this because otherwise I'd have to mix the food coloring up again so it's really dark, so it shows up. I'm going to flick the toothbrush. I've just rubbed it in the paint. So this is going to make small splatters. And I'll zoom in a second so you can maybe see what that looks like. So maybe instead of throwing toothbrushes away when you're done, you could wash them in really hot water and then start using them for art. I'm going to try one more little splatter here with some darker blue. Even darker still. And I will go ahead and zoom in so you can see that. You can see all those little splatters. So the toothbrush is another fun technique that you can use with crayons and watercolor. So one other fun thing you can do with the crayon or watercolor resist is draw on white paper with white crayon. And I bet some of you have done this before. I'm using some thick watercolor paper just so you can see the difference. But again, you could do this on any type of paper. You just can't put quite as much paint on if you're using a very thin piece of paper. So I'm pressing down quite hard with the crayon, and I'm just going to draw something really fast here so you get the idea. Maybe you can guess what I'm drawing even if you can't see it. I can barely see it. But it's fun. It's a different way of thinking and creating. You could create secret pictures for somebody or messages by just handing them a what looks like a plain piece of paper and tell them they need to paint over it to see what it is. All right, here I'm going to take the paper below it away. Let's paint over it and see what happens. So I'm still just using the food coloring paint that I made. I'll just try one color to start with, just so you can get the idea of what I'm doing. And of course, the darker paint you use, the more contrast there will be, and your image will stand out even more. Can you see it? Or do I need to use darker paint? I think you can see it. Let's try a little darker paint. I'm going to use black. Ooh, that looks pretty cool. I like that. Now you can really see it, right? So maybe the color you're painting matches what you've drawn. Like I could paint, since this is a little sailboat, I could paint sky color and water. Or maybe it has nothing to do with your picture. Maybe you're just experimenting and you're trying different colors that you think would look good. And you can't see me, but I am rinsing my brush off between colors. That one got a little dark still. I might have still had some black in it. Probably because my water that I'm after I rinse the black off, the color changed the water pretty dramatically. I kind of just like how the blue blends in there. And then, so now I could take a paper towel too, and if some of it got covered up, like maybe I didn't draw with the crayon very dark there, I'm not sure. Or maybe the color I added just wasn't very dark. I might not have pushed down with the crayon, but that's okay. It almost gives the impression that there's a storm coming or it's kind of foggy. I like it. So, watercolor resist is one thing you can do with crayons. I'd also like to show you how you can use markers and crayons together. So another thing you can do is, for your crayon drawing, you can draw from observation. And that means to observe what's around you, whether it's in your house, out in nature, maybe you're looking at an image in a book or online. I have a book of birds and I'm going to draw a robin. And I'm using that as a starting point. My drawing's probably not going to look exactly like it, but I can use it to help me with the shapes. So I'm going to start with pencil. I know that earlier I said we were just going to stick to crayon, but I decided I actually need to show you how to use crayon with other materials. So I am just using the side of my pencil. This helps me be able to just kind of be looser. You don't have to draw like this, but I find that it's helpful just to kind of map out the basic shapes. So I'm looking at the shapes I see and trying to draw the shapes and the lines. I will worry about all the details later. And everybody draws differently. You kind of have to practice a lot and see what works the best for you. But this allows me to just get like the basics of what I'm drawing down, and then I can work on the changes. And I'm drawing on a paper plate. You could draw on anything. I just thought I'd show that you don't always have to just draw on paper. So once this is drawn, I'm actually going to outline it with marker and then use crayon to add the color. And I always have a hard time drawing the legs and the feet of birds because they look so strange. But this is why observation helps. Sometimes we draw real life and it looks strange, but that's what it looks like. And I see, oh, I could add more space here. So as I go, I'm going to have to make adjustments. And I'm also looking at the shape of the feathers and the size of everything. And there's the tail feather and the eye. I picked the robin because we see lots of robins right now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some marker to it and then add crayon. I'm going to speed it up. Okay, so here's a good example of doing an art project only to realize when you're done that it's not quite how you want. Once I stood up, I totally see that the bird's body is going back and mine's upright. No wonder the feet weren't looking right. It's almost like I should have just had this going back like that. But oh well, maybe I'll just cut this part of the bird out and ooh, I'll show you what I'll do. I'm pretty excited about this. I just have some brown paper. I went out and got a stick from outside, and that could eventually be glued on there. I cut out the bird, and I just wanted to say, maybe that's how I actually turn my mistake into something new. If any of you have read Beautiful Oops or had me read that book to you, it's a book about taking mistakes and letting them lead you in a new direction, and that's exactly what happened here. I also want to point out, when you saw me drawing the bird, you noticed I went over it with marker first, and I added texture throughout the bird, and I did go pretty fast. I think I could have gotten even more detailed texture for the feathers, but I made sure to add some of that information, and then I went back over it with crayon. Now I could have simply just colored flat areas of color in, but I chose to layer different browns and oranges and even black here to create the different shades of the robin's feathers. And I did that in different parts of the bird as well. So that's the end of our What Can You Do with a Crayon tutorial, part 2. I hope this tutorial gave you some even more ideas on using crayons and also combining them with other materials. All right, have fun and thanks for watching.